Okay, Alexander, we have to talk about the meeting between the United States and Russia, between Blinken and Lavrov on the sidelines in Reykjavik, Iceland. And, they're kind words between both um, Secretary of State foreign ministers. And it leaves me wondering, Lavrov kind of left the meeting and the press conference. He spoke in English to Blinken as well, and he kind of left it saying, I'll paraphrase, we're happy with the statements, with the progress we've made with the United States. There seems to be a desire to find a solution to much of the deadlock and to many of the problems between the two countries. And the Russians said that they will reciprocate the olive branch that it appears Blinken is giving towards the Russians. But I always kind of wonder to myself, this has happened over and over and over again. And right when you think there's going to be a reset, and Lavrov is sitting there with Hillary Clinton, and they're about to push that plastic reset button. I don't know if you remember that big
Absolutely, of
reset
course.
button that was misspelled, by the way, as well. It was a misspelling on the reset button. But as they're going to punch that reset button, you have a coup in Ukraine, or you have something else that is happening. The deep state is pulling behind the backs of the Russians. I don't know. It just seems to me that there's this olive branch, but the deep state is always there, man. You got to be careful. So, what do you make of this meeting?
Well, I'm going to be straightforward about it. I mean, the utter cynicism with which Lavrov conducted himself at that press conference, which he left almost immediately after making very brief comments, is for me encapsulated by the one question he took and the one answer he gave. Now, the question was from a press reporter: has Russia cleared the summit? This is the summit meeting, between Biden and Putin that we're all hearing about. And Lavrov replied, "We are not a customs office to clear anything." That's it. And then he walked out. So, yes, he heard all these things that Blinken said. He's got lots of concessions on all kinds of things from the Americans. I mean, in a way, I think what the Russians are doing is they're stringing the Americans along. So the US didn't blame them for the Colonial Pipeline hack, if you believe in that. I know some people don't, but there were all kinds of people who pointed Russia, but Biden said it's nothing to do with Russia. There might be Russian actors, but it wasn't them. They've managed to get the US to agree to the extension of the START treaty. This hasn't been much discussed. The Russians wanted the START treaty extended for 5 years, unamended. The US agreed to that. Now they've also got the US to agree to waive key sanctions on Nord Stream 2. The US pulled its ships out of the Black Sea. It basically came along to Ukraine and said, we're not going to fight with you. So the Russians are able to sit back, play along with this thing, and get all the United States, Biden, as they chase for this summit, to make all kinds of emollientative things to give the Russians little bits here, little bits there. Nothing very much of substance so far. But from Lavrov's point of view, he listens, he pockets what the Americans are giving him, and then he walks away. And that's, it seems to me, what the Russians are doing at the moment. I think sooner or later there's going to be a summit, maybe even in June. But at the moment, it should be very clear it's the US that's making all the running. It's the US that's making all the concessions. I saw the Financial Times trying to look at what the Russians have done in return, and coming up with the fact that the Russians de-escalated by withdrawing their troops from Ukraine, from the border with Ukraine. Well, that simply isn't correct. I mean, what actually happened, as we know, is that the Russians pulled back their troops when the US and the Europeans and the Ukrainians confirmed that there wouldn't be an offensive there, and when the US pulled its ships out of the Black Sea. We've discussed this at enormous length. And the only other thing they could come up with was the fact that Navalny has been allowed to see some civilian doctors, which was always something that was offered to him. It's not what he demanded. He demanded to be seen by his own doctor, which is something completely different, and which the Russians refused to do. So non-existent concessions from the Russians, minor concessions, but real concessions nonetheless from the Americans. I think that agreeing the 5-year extension of the START treaty is probably more than just a minor concession, and agreeing not to pursue sanctions on Nord Stream 2 is probably not a minor concession either, but nothing of any huge significance. But from the Russian point of view, this is all going quite well. So they play along with this idea, they string the Americans along, and they get more out of them. And it seems to me that with a master poker player, which is what Lavrov is, that's exactly what you're seeing. Come back to this again. Has Russia cleared the summit? We are not a customs office to clear anything.
I'm really interested as to what's going on. I'm really curious, and I can't figure out exactly what games are being played. We had 4 years of Trump's a Putin puppet, and the Russia Gate, Ukraine Gate. I mean, okay, we heard everything during those 4 years with Trump as president. He couldn't even call Putin without some allegations being thrown at him, and some media stories about the ever-present power of Vladimir Putin, and the Dr. Evil persona that they created in and around him and around Russia. In comes Biden, and the Biden administration, as we know, is not really running the show, or maybe it's one component of perhaps 5 different entities that are running the United States at this point. So the Biden White House may be one entity that is trying to get things done, but we know that there's all kinds of different silos that are also running things in the United States. And the Biden administration, or maybe one of their silos, perhaps a combination of both, 2 or 3 different silos, decided to test the Russians. They tested them in Ukraine, they tested them in Belarus, and we've documented what happened, and we know where that ended up. And now it seems that the Biden administration, this one silo of power in the United States, is being very sweet to the Russians. I mean, they're being very kind to the Russians, it seems. You still have the mainstream media smears of Putin. You now have the Republicans that are smearing Putin and the Nord Stream 2, and they're saying, my God, okay, we understand the domestic political implications there. My God, I can't believe Biden gave this to Putin, 4 years of Trump, and now Biden is kissing Putin's ass with Nord Stream 2, and he allowed him to build the pipeline. Anyway, all kinds of stupidity and nonsense from the Republicans coming out of there. But I understand. You explained why they're doing this, and it makes sense. Okay, 4 years of Trump, and now Biden is kissing, according to them, he's kissing the Russians' ass, and so, we're going to hit back at the Democrats and at Biden. I understand that, but putting all of that aside, why is the Biden administration being so sweet to the Russians? Why are they being so kind? Why are they being so forthcoming, so accommodating? Are you worried that something is going to happen? Are you worried that maybe one of these other silos of power is going to say, screw this, I'm going to start something up? I can't have this go on any longer. Did the Biden administration get spooked with what happened in Belarus and Ukraine and say, screw this, the Kremlin, they're on their game. They understand what's going on. We can't really pull any stunts. Is there a China factor involved? Is there a Hunter? I'm throwing everything at you right now because I don't understand what's going on. Is there a Hunter factor involved? Hunter was doing a lot of interesting things in Ukraine. I'm sure the Russians have a lot of interesting things about a Hunter. Is this, once again, is this a China thing? Because we understand the relationship between Biden and China and Russia and all of this stuff. Well, doesn't this interest you? Doesn't this make you curious as to what's happening here?
It's absolutely fascinating because, and by the way, Greenwald has written an absolutely, Glenn Greenwald, an absolutely scathing article about this, pointing out how the Democrats spent the last 5 years talking about how Donald Trump was this agent of the Russians and was doing Putin's bidding all the time and was far too close to Putin and all that, and basically wrecked his presidency on that basis. And in fact, Trump was much tougher with the Russians, whereas Biden, all the things he's been doing over the last couple of weeks, if Trump had tried to do them, I mean, the Democrats would have gone bananas. And we'd have all the talk shows, all the cable news networks. They'd have gone into an absolute overdrive, proving that this showed what a glove puppet of Putin Donald Trump was. So, I mean, there is this extraordinary contrast and this extraordinary change. Now, obviously, I am not somebody who is party to the internal discussions within the US government, but I think that you put your finger on it when you said that they were spooked by what happened in Belarus and Ukraine. I think when the Biden administration took office, there was this idea, plan almost, if you like, that they were going to do a major hit on Russia, that they were going to throw Russia into confusion, perhaps even destabilize the government there, perhaps knock Putin out of contention entirely, and they were going to do that by provoking a crisis in Ukraine, forcing the Russians to agree to concessions and get the Ukrainians on the contact line and threaten a military offensive, perhaps even launch a political offensive backed by British and US warships in the Black Sea, that there were going to be sanctions rolled out against the Russians targeting Russian foreign debt, that there was going to be simultaneously this big coup attempt in Belarus, that there was also going to be a big attempt to orchestrate protests in Russia itself around the personality of Alexei Navalny. All of this was planned and came together. And then over the course of April, it became clear that it wasn't going to happen. No part of that strategy worked. The coup in Belarus was squelched. The attempt to pressure the Russians in eastern Ukraine simply provoked a massive Russian military reaction. And the sanctions were exposed as ineffective, and Navalny and his supporters in Russia turned out to be people of absolutely minimal significance. Bear in mind, John Brennan, former CIA agent, was actually talking a few months ago, during the election campaign, about how he wanted to see Biden president in the US and Navalny president in Russia. He was even tweeting about it. So I think that gives you an idea of what the agenda was. And of course, it all failed. That absolutely caused shock and dismay within the administration, because of course the very last thing they wanted was a war in Ukraine, where the United States would be shown to be ineffectual and where Ukraine would be comprehensively defeated and perhaps destroyed, and which might provoke a political crisis in Washington. So they got the president to telephone Putin, propose a summit, and try to find ways to de-escalate the thing and dial it down. And that's, I think, ultimately what this is about. Quite possibly there is some element of concern that the Russians have compromat on the Bidens, as you absolutely rightly say. They know everything that the Bidens were up to in Ukraine, and we've seen the attempt to close down Ukrainian television stations, which, according to Time magazine, was partly in response to that. But I think overall the big thing was that they got spooked when their plans not only failed to succeed, but when they did fail to succeed, they failed in a way that actually threatened a foreign policy disaster right at the start of the new administration. And I think that's opened a space for counter voices in the administration, which say, look, Russia isn't our real adversary, China is, we need to come to some kind of deal with the Russians to calm things down in Europe so that we can put all the focus of our energies on countering China in the South China Sea and in the Pacific region. So that's opened that space, and Blinken himself seems to be associated with that second school of thought. The problem is, I don't think that this is for real, because ultimately the political balance in the administration has not changed. Those people who still want confrontation with Russia are still there. They've suffered a big setback. Their plans this year went horribly awry, but they're only waiting for the opportunity to come back, and sooner or later they will. So I think the Russians understand that completely. So that's why Lavrov and Putin and the Russians are doing what they're doing at the moment, which is they're going along with the Americans up to a certain point, getting the Americans to make useful concessions to them on the START Treaty, on Nord Stream 2, and on the rest, and being utterly cynical and skeptical about it, and stringing the Americans along. And I think that's what's happened. I don't think this is permanent. I don't think this is for real. I fully expect that before very long, we're going to see the situation with Russia start to get really critical and bad again. But for the moment, we have this interval, if you like, when things are a bit calmer, a bit quieter, because policies, that anti-Russian policy, failed so spectacularly at the start of this year, and the Russians are making the most of it that they can.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I actually think this is quite dangerous, what's going on, because every time we've seen any type of American government try to find some sort of peace with Russia, you have something really bad happen.
Absolutely.
Really bad happen. And I think you're going to end up in the same place this time around as well. The minute the neocons and the war machine starts to sense that Biden, I can see them sitting in a room saying, you know what, man, he's lost his mind. When we put him in office, we didn't expect this to happen. That's what they're going to say, and they're going to start something. I can see them having that conversation.
That is exactly right. And by the way, I would add something, and it's, it flows directly from your point. Every time there is an attempt to improve relations, not only does that make the neocon faction, I'm going to call them that, and the MIC and all those people even more angry, but they always arrange for the crisis that comes to wreck that rapprochement to be worse than the crisis which preceded it. So given that the previous crisis was the one over Ukraine back in 2014, which was a big crisis, goodness, one really worries what the next crisis is going to be all about. But I am sure that it is coming. And for the time being, I'm sure the Russians think that too. And they're working very hard at the moment, I think, to shore up their defences. They've been doing this all the time. They've been strengthening their military. They've been hardening their financial system. We've discussed this many times in many programs. They're now taking strong action against US-backed NGOs within Russia itself. And I think that trend of Russian policy will continue. They will use this space to make themselves ready for whatever storm comes, because one will come. Sooner or later, it always does. And each time the storm comes, it's a bit more violent than the one which preceded it.
Yeah, I agree with you there. All right, we will end this video on that note. Guys, look for us on Odyssey. Look for us on SuperU, the new free speech video platform, BitChute, and join our locals community. Guys, our locals community is really taking off. So check us out there. The conversation is really, really great on our locals community. And of course, the Duran shop, 10% off when you use the code REALNEWS, 10% off everything. Magic mugs, sweatshirts, t-shirts, you name it, 10% off. Use that code REALNEWS. You'll find all the links down below in the description box. Take care.